Thanks everybody for joining us. We're NantStudios. We're going to be talking to you today about automotive visuals and ICVFX. NantStudios, for those of you who are not familiar, we run LED volumes both in El Segundo, Los Angeles, and Melbourne, Australia. We provide a slew of production services from content creation that Brian will talk about, and everything in between. I'll just do a very quick intro to the team here. So I'm Gary Marshall, Vice President, Virtual Production. With me on stage is Brian Brown.
Hi.
Head of Real-Time Art, and Christine Mahara, who is the Senior Producer for NantStudios. As I said, for those of you who aren't familiar, we'll just play a brief video. This video is actually interesting because we've literally just released this video, and it describes the work we do and also the recent stage builds of what we built in Australia. So I'm going to let this run, and then we'll get into the meat of the talk. But this will just give you some familiarity with what we do.
It's overwhelming at first. You see it and you start getting ideas about how you want to start approaching shots in different ways.
It takes us into a new world where we're kind of bypassing the traditional green screens, and we're now being able to immerse people in different parts of the world by bringing it to them.
NantStudios is a production ecosystem consisting of traditional broadcast and virtual production stages. We specifically specialize in on-set virtual production services and building in-camera visual effects volumes globally.
We are fully integrated from the creative to the building of walls, as well as creating the content.
The volume consists of a large LED wall, also a ceiling, so you could create a 360 digital environment.
There's a certain beauty to filming an LED panel with your actor in front of it. You're able to capture it at a level of realism that just isn't capable if you're doing it with a green screen.
We've been operating our own stages in Los Angeles for a number of years with 50 plus projects under our belt. We wanted to consult with filmmakers and various creative individuals who'd had significant experience shooting in this context. So we would put them in virtual scouting environments, and then they could come up with final designs that really were a perfect playground and sandbox for the types of projects and creators that we'd want to attract.
Right now in Los Angeles, we're building 6 different stages that'll consist of traditional black box, green screen, performance capture, and in-camera visual effects LED stages. Where I'm sitting today in Melbourne, Australia, this is sort of the announcement of our global expansion. We have 2 LED volumes here at NantStudios, Melbourne, each one of significant scale. Stage 1, our largest stage, is very exciting in that it sits at a height of 39 feet. This is the tallest stage in the world by a considerable sum. What this allows productions to do is get a wider angle lens on most of their shots without seeing the gap between the ceiling and the wall. This is very significant because it means that we can push the envelope even closer to final pixel. We also have what we call plug walls. Our plug walls are designed on a TriCaster wheel system. We can really shape the volume into any size, shape, scale that the director or director of photography wants.
Stage 3 is a slightly higher resolution wall. It's probably more designed for those types of moving shots where we might get a lot closer to the wall and reflections need to be that bit sharper.
It'll work well for automotive process vehicle work, commercial work, music videos.
We knew that we wanted something where we could articulate the ceiling, be able to pitch it and angle it to really craft the light that you're getting from the ceiling.
Our ceiling pods can be dropped to the floor so that grips and electrics can actually rig lighting to our ceiling pods and then send those pods back up so that they don't need to work at extreme heights.
The Unreal Engine is incredible. We can send a group of people outside and they'll take pictures of all of these locations that they want. And then we'll bring them back and we'll use this process called photogrammetry, where we have a computer solve where all of those pictures were taken and create what's called a gray box mesh. We'll design the world that they're going to be in. going through this iteration process from virtual scouting to gray boxing, to virtual scouting again, to lighting, to eventually testing on the wall, and then putting real set deck in front of it, and then matching the two together.
It's allowing us to really push photoreal environments in faster ways with full dynamic lighting, being able to change whether it's night or day in a matter of moments. It really gives filmmakers so much flexibility.
It's truly incredible what you can do, and we're only at the beginning of it. At our core, we want to be on the bleeding edge. Everyone in NantStudios loves this technology, breathes this technology.
For filmmaking, it's one of those sort of pivotal moments.
What we especially like at NantStudios is these projects that come to us and say, we want to try this thing that nobody's ever done before. Our response is always yes. We love to rise to those challenges. So as you can see, we've been very busy the world over building these stages, creating this content. Brian is going to do a deep dive on the content side of it. Kristen's going to speak about the production side. But just to recap, so we provide stage services, LED in LA and Melbourne, real-time art department that Brian runs. We create content for the wall and for immersive experiences, VR, AR. We have performance capture stages, both in LA and Melbourne. And obviously we consult on ICVFX and volume, meaning we build them for ourselves and we build them for other people as well. So moving on, really what this talk will focus on is real time, why we're using the engine, how we're using it. As you can see there, kind of the ethos of how the pipeline and the vertically integrated pipeline is kind of catering to these needs of automotive, and how we bring all these services together and end up in a sort of holistic process that eventually ends at the wall in terms of the production phase, but then how those assets move through into a post-pipeline, either if we're doing post-production ourselves or if we're handing that over to a traditional post vendor. So I'm going to hand it over now to Kristen, and Kristen will talk about the principles of why it is that we're particularly seeing automotive embrace ICVFX.
Yeah, so, you know, when you think about kind of some of the things that we've done and some of the examples you just saw, some of the more obvious reasons maybe for utilizing the LED volume, right, are things like immersive lighting and immersive reflections, 12-hour times of day, right? Everyone's kind of heard that now at this point. But what we've noticed and from our experience with some of the automotive clients, you know, are kind of some of these things listed here. For example, you know, they're able to shoot multiple environments and go to multiple locations within a very short period of time. You know, they can travel to the desert, they can travel to the snow, right? And kind of the most time, I would say, that it takes to be able to swap between those is not necessarily the content, it's more about changing physical set, right? So they're able to maximize their shoot days as much as possible. Something else that has come to us quite a bit are, you know, productions having A-list talent involved with their shoots. They're only available for one day for these commercial spots, right? So how can they utilize their time efficiently and get the most out of their availability? And then, you know, there's some of the kind of more general things as far as production value, right? Things that we all know with the value of using the Unreal Engine, being able to make changes on the fly. I would say that a lot of the first-time experiences that we have with clients, they're able to actually see their spot coming together, right? So for agencies, for creatives, for directors, DPs, to be able to actually see these spots and see how their shots are coming together, as opposed to shooting this green screen, is definitely a huge benefit for them. In terms of cost efficiencies and savings, there's definitely a lot here as far as the physical set deck goes, being able to utilize, you know, being able to shoot multiple locations and travel to multiple locations. They're not, you know, actually sending out a full crew to all of these physical locations as well. Sometimes what happens is, depending on timelines, they'll actually send out just a small crew to kind of go and do some plates, some 2D plates and that sort of thing. So They're able to save costs there with travel, with per diems, with everything associated there. We'll talk a little bit more later in this conversation about some of the content efficiencies that we see and the ability to reuse assets and think about different ways to utilize some of the things that you're already creating. And then we're also, in general, seeing some initiatives as far as sustainability, right? And how certain companies are looking for more of these opportunities to, figure out a way to fulfill these kind of sustainability options. And what's happening is that more and more of these, companies are kind of coming out to us looking for why they should shoot LED and how that kind of helps contribute towards that. And something that, as NantStudios, we've done actually is invested quite a bit to put very specialized solar panels on top of our stage to be able to power all of the stage needs. So this is a huge advantage for anybody looking for some of these types of sustainability options and something that we like to promote. And then the last note here is definitely control and security as far as being able to shoot some of the unannounced vehicles or code red vehicles, as some companies call them, right? Traditionally, in the past, these have been very hard to do, or it's very hard to shoot some of these cars in public, get all the permits, make sure no one, whoever doesn't need to be there basically doesn't, we can kind of control the visibility on that. So definitely being able to have the control and the flexibility to control the security of that is important as well. And then before we kind of show some examples here, we wanted to talk about a little bit of some of the things that we've seen and some of the things that we've been approached with. There's very specific locations that everybody kind of needs and is looking for. For example, like a beach or a mountain road, coastal highway, right? All of those things are very common car commercial backgrounds. So being able to create a library of these things is going to be helpful and more efficient for the timelines that they have. And Brian's actually going to speak to that a little bit later on. There's also been some cases where people have asked and wanted to film in locations that are just not accessible, right? No one's going to take a car and go shoot it in the Arctic, but instead of doing that green screen, can we utilize the volume and recreate those digital environments in this way? And then motion-based capabilities as well is something that we hear a lot about. It kind of depends on, obviously, the spot and the amount of movement they need, but being able to kind of come up with something that fulfills some of these needs as opposed to some guys kind of pushing the back of the car, right? Definitely something that we're looking into further, and Gary will speak a little bit more about that as far as what we're doing to advance that space. So in this video here, we're going to show some examples of what people are doing now. As an example, it's just kind of a way to look at what's possible now and think about how we can push this further in the future. And now I'll hand it over to Brian, who will talk about the differences in the types of content that we deal with and some of the ways that we're looking to expand this further in the future.
So has everyone here heard of virtual production? No, I'm just kidding. So I actually get to be the lucky one who gets to create the art. I help run the team of amazing content creators and artists here at NantStudios for our real-time art department. And there's a couple different ways that we approach creating assets and creating content for automotive commercials. There's two main approaches that we have. We have both a 2D and a 3D approach. The first is 2D video plates. Usually they're easier and more straightforward to capture. You can send a small team out to anywhere outside the country or within the country to a specific place, capture some 360 plates, come back, and play them back on the screen. It's super straightforward. It's really fast to get stuff running on there. We run a couple different systems to get that done. But some of the issues that you do run into are like stabilization. We've had many different plate companies do many different things, and the biggest thing is sort of stabilization and the solving of how each of the cameras come together. So while this is a fast approach, this is great, but what you see is sort of what you get. So anything you need to change either has to be rendered in a composition setting or has to be recreated and done at a specific height. So you lose a lot of the parallax and some of the things that sort of make in-camera visual effects sort of shine now, but it's great for capturing things like reflections or interior shots. It's used quite a bit. The next approach is the 3D approach. The 3D approach is my favorite approach. I'm a little bit more biased because it's where all the magic sort of happens. It's a vastly more iterative and creative process. It gives you control over the entire scene and sort of allows you to sculpt and create every frame in a way a director or DP will want. But some of the things about it is because all of this has to be created from scratch, it's a little bit more time consuming to create, and it costs quite a bit more money than sending stuff out and doing it in 2D. But because of this, you are vastly more flexible. So what our real-time art department likes to do is sort of have a conversation with these directors and DPs and to figure out what exactly they need to shoot, how they're going to shoot. We use things like previs and techvis to sort of determine what exactly needs to happen. And then we'll sort of sculpt either a moving scene or a 2D pack or a 3D pack shot to sort of allow it to be as art directable as possible on the day so that during that pre-light, everyone's making their day and everything is sort of aligned perfectly at that moment. One of the things that we've sort of done and what Kristen and Gary have hinted at is there's a lot of different locations throughout, like every sort of shot is always, one of the things we noticed early on is that every company was coming to us and trying to do an overview or a pack shot of like a city, or was trying to do certain downtown street areas, or was doing the PCH, or there's a very famous bridge called the 6th Street Bridge in Los Angeles. All of those things are really expensive to make, but we've decided to create a library of these places that sort of start as a starting point for where we could have these prefab libraries to start with. So currently we have a desert road or a Santa Cruz forest or a specific part of downtown Wilshire, LA. We've been asked to do things like the Brooklyn Bridge, which you can't actually shoot on. So this point allows us sort of to like be as creative as possible and give a starting point, because a lot of times these automotive commercials, they have a very fast turnaround. So we sort of start with this prefab approach. The next, my favorite is sort of a creative build from scratch, though. I think a lot of us are always chasing our tails, trying to get things as photoreal as possible. And while that's incredibly interesting and a really great challenge, I think some of the best and most artistic commercials that I've seen have been things that have been more surreal. So starting from scratch and building from scratch allows us to sort of get exactly what a client needs. Many times people are like, because we have a library, they'll come to us and be like, oh, you have like downtown Paris? No, we don't have downtown Paris, we have to make that. So a more creative approach is sort of allows us to go through and build everything from scratch. It can be a little bit more expensive and has a little bit longer lead times, but I think it sort of allows us to do things that you cannot do by quickly sending a crew out or quickly going off of a prefab. So like we've had people come and be like, hey, can you put the Subaru on Mars, or can you make sure that this GMC is going over the mountains of the moon? You know, you can't send a crew there, so we have to actually make that. There's a couple different approaches we have to content creation. We could either go with, and you'll see in this first video here, this is more of a static approach. What this is sort of entailing is, this is sort of setting up a traditional 2D or 3D scene that has 2D lighting. All of this is baked in, and what we will do is we'll build a certain section of road, and we'll send our stage down that road, and we'll send it sort of over and over again. But the problem with that is it sort of gives you like a discrete section of road, and you sort of have to time with the DP and the director what things need to be seen, how to keep continuity within a shot. So that's one of the approaches. It gives you higher quality lighting, and it gives you a little bit more art directability. But the other approach, which is sort of an endless runner approach, Kristen, if you could click the next slide under it, this allows us to build more modularly. So what we sort of do is we build specific patches of the Unreal Engine, and we sort of build an endless running game system. And what this allows us to do is create certain patches, and through the system itself, switch them on and off. And this basically will let us have a moving scene just endlessly run. This is great. This is great for a commercial that just needs to go, and you need to just have someone doing dialogue on a bus or something that's just going and going and going and going. Because it's not discrete, it allows you to just constantly keep going, and it makes it so you don't have to time as much. And there's a couple different approaches we do to it, but it vastly speeds up the iteration process. The downside to this, though, is because everything in this has to be movable, the lighting, and which is definitely getting better with Lumen, the lighting isn't as robust as a baked lighting solution that you would have in the more 2D still approach. So one of the things that also I handle here at the Real-Time Art Department is we also handle validation from our internal team, as well as external visual effects houses. That's every single visual effects house that comes to us with a different set of challenges. But one of the challenges that comes specifically from automotive commercials is a lot of times with a normal commercial, you'll get like a single environment, and you'll only have to validate the environment from a specific shot. You know, the previs has been done, the tech-vis has been done. We know we're going to be using a crane. We know we're going to be looking in a single direction. This is very different on an automotive shoot. We're constantly sort of moving in a direction, and just like a game, we have to send people down, we have to QA it, and we sort of have to validate it from every single angle, which has its own set of problems. You know, we might be able to drive and look at one place, but there's a rock where there's a rock on top of a rock on top of another rock, and that area there's slowdown. So we have to send our validation team through, QA what exactly is going to be shot and how exactly we can sort of fix this. One of the other things that's a little bit weird is sometimes motion blur tends to look worse. So we tend to either turn on motion blur or turn off motion blur. Things like fog can be an issue, as well as imposters. Imposters tend to look at the camera, so if a camera is moving, you're just going to see an entire forest sort of look at you, which is very creepy, especially in a video game engine. And the other thing that we try to do as well is we try to keep objects outside the volume itself. Many people will build a road right up, and they'll try to put the volume inside of it. And while this looks good from specific points, if there's a piece of foliage or a rock or something that the camera actually goes through, the camera will clip right in front of the camera, blocking the actual view, and you'll just sort of run right into stuff. So a lot of our validation is making sure that all of those angles sort of work. The next thing that we're trying to do is sort of solve some of the issues that we have with doing a full commercial. If you can see here, this is a commercial that's completely done with Path Tracer. One of the things we can't do right now is sort of show the wheels moving. So one of the solves to that is sort of using Path Tracer and doing a traditional VFX model to marry fully rendered Unreal art with on volume rendered live action. So that's sort of where we're sort of pushing towards with NantStudios and our real-time art department. And sort of this is sort of the next step. It's doing a full in-camera visual effects with full path tracing and compositing backend and pipeline to sort of make an entire commercial. I'm going to hand this off back to Kristen, and she's going to talk about some of the production perspectives.
So before Gary talks about some of the cooler things here, we wanted to touch upon a couple things that we feel like are important just to mention and for people to be aware of when thinking about shooting with automotive or just shooting with ICVFX in general. Kind of a little bit, we'll show an example of what a shoot workflow could be, but just something to note from, at least from the production perspective. Once we initially engage with a client, we do a lot of more of the education as far as what's possible, what's achievable, that sort of thing, because there's a lot of people that we end up working with that have never used this before or have seen it maybe as a behind the scenes from The Mandalorian or from TV shows, right? So a part of the production role for us is really helping to mitigate some of that risk that these agencies or some of these production companies feel when using a new technology for the first time. So something, we can kind of show this here as kind of just an example of that shoot workflow timeline, right? So initially, when companies come, they engage with us, right? We have those initial creative discussions. We work with DPs, we work with directors, whoever is actually on the project at that time, especially art department, to kind of go through what's possible, how things are going to look as much as they can before they have to submit bids through. And we'll do several rounds of bidding with them, that sort of thing. That always happens. And then once the project awards, we start to look into some pre-production techniques, right? So things like layout is super important with what we do, and to get everybody to be on the same page and understand what it's going to look like, how they can shape their shots, that sort of thing. Gary will speak to some of the VR scouting and virtual camera tools that are possible within Engine. And if time permitting, we definitely promote that as much as possible to, again, help everybody be on the same page there. And then once we're good with that, we start the initial build, at least for the 3D environment, or productions will go out and shoot 2D plates. Throughout the process, we validate, as Brian mentioned, we do wall testing to make sure that everyone is comfortable with what they're seeing, so they can make changes before they show up on the day. And then we get into the fun tech scout, pre-light, and shoot. Now, as far as timelines and budgets, don't want to bore you guys too much with this, but there are just a couple things here that are important with what we deal with, at least on the automotive commercial end. Specifically, most of these projects have very small timelines. They're probably around 3 to 4 weeks upon award. So, creating a custom 3D environment isn't something that's always feasible. And we have to have options like what Brian mentioned with the library of assets, having environments that they could start from, finding different ways to make the content creation portion of this more efficient, and work for the timelines that they have. And then as far as budgets, we deal with kind of a range of $20K to maybe $60K for a shoot day. I would say that most of the clients that we deal with that come in on the lower end of that range are traditionally used to, say, a $15K, $20K, green screen shoot or traditional shoot, right? So part of the risk mitigation, the kind of education portion of what we do is, talking about how they can utilize some of their budget from maybe post, because we're aiming for in-camera finals as much as possible. So that's, it's a process that not many people are familiar with, and it's a lot of conversations that we do need to have to make sure people feel comfortable with moving forward in this direction. Just the last thing here, as far as asset and content efficiencies, before I kind of hand it over to Gary here, there's, again, kind of what we want to make sure from the production end is that we can be efficient with the amount of time we're putting and investing into creating this content. Something to think about, and what we've kind of had initial discussions with a lot of these companies, right, is they have campaigns for, say, a certain look or a place that they're filming at. They even have just multiple location sets, right? So in terms of a campaign or somewhere where they're returning to specific locations like a dealership or like a warehouse, putting the money up front into creating those assets and then being able to reuse them throughout the rest of their campaign is extremely beneficial as far as cost savings, and again, reusing those assets in an efficient way. We had actually a project that came through just this year, and they came to us at the very beginning, and they said they had multiple spots for this campaign. They put more money, obviously, up front to build that environment, and then they were able to reuse it again and again for the next 5 shoots that they had. And when speaking to them and their cost consultants, they actually mentioned that they saved roughly $90,000 per spot of just art department alone, and then overall saved closer to $450,000 just from being able to utilize the technology and save more on their budget overall and be efficient with that. So something to keep in mind as far as asset and content efficiencies and thinking about different ways to streamline this process in the future. So now I'll hand it over to Gary here, who will speak more to some of those asset lifecycle techniques and things to think about, ways to make this more efficient.
Cool, thanks, Kristen. And that really is to sort of underscore what Kristen mentioned there. I think we've seen a lot of these talks, but rarely do people actually give out tangible numbers and actually talk about budgets. And we wanted to differentiate ourselves in that respect. Often people just gloss over it and say, oh, there's cost savings, but okay, well, what does that mean? What are the cost savings? So I think, if you're taking away elements from our presentation, that should be one that sticks in the back of your head. But let's talk about, I'm going to touch on this real quickly because I can see the time is evaporating. Asset life cycle, this is like a build once and use it everywhere. I think we may have co-opted that from Java or something. But the thing about automotive is that automotive manufacturers and the design process and marketing, they work in extreme silos. So there's assets being created at various stages of, bringing a car from the design phase to manufacturer to actually delivering it to consumers. And they don't realize by interfacing with these various departments, it's interesting that they're really not communicating. So, what we're trying to do is say, okay, well, at the design stage, there must be a visualization process. There's renderings, there's concept drawings. And, how can we come up with a process that is really efficient about how these assets get used? So you can see on that slide there, engineering, validating it, marketing, producer projects it on the wall, i.e. what we're doing, and then it goes to the driver and then the consumer. But things like dealerships, Brian's team just were involved in a project where we were provided with a rough photo scan package of a dealership for a particular car brand, and then Brian's team went in, they recreated it, resurfaced it, and so what the agency, it took a while for them to fully sort of grasp the implications of having this evergreen asset that, okay, they can now shoot a whole range of different commercials there. They can go in and they can dress it for certain holiday seasons, or they can reuse it in a number of ways. And then it can also exist in a different form of media. It can be exported to print media, or we can create an immersive experience out of it. If they want consumers to, at the end of a commercial that we might do in ICVFX, pop up a QR code. Now they can go in a web app or VR into that same dealership asset. They can play with car configurators. They can do all kinds of things in there. So there's a video here, which if Kristen just wants to click on that. This is something we did with our friends at I/O, and was sort of super happy with how this turned out. But this was an example of taking a digital car asset and kind of similar to what Brian was speaking to in terms of how that intercuts between the post process and the ICVFX process. And I think this is a great example of how it's in this spot we were able to get it to a very seamless execution and a seamless illusion of the physical car and the digital car. So that's kind of what we're doing right now as we engage with agencies or an automotive manufacturers is saying like, hey, you might already have a lot of these assets. You just need to work with us, and we'll educate you on how to be much more cognizant of how they move through a production process. So here's some tools. We have a small but nimble team of developers and engineers at NantStudios. We're not a large team. Even the whole company is not a large team. I don't need to go too much into this. Everybody's familiar with what this is now. We don't always get time to do this, as I think Kristen mentioned, but it is an important part of the process for us, sort of bridging the previs and tech-viz process with what we're doing on set. And something that you might not really naturally think of is that we do a lot of is reflection viz. So we will get a digital car in the volume and we will go in there in VR and we will look at how as we light up various parts of the LED wall, what kind of quality of reflection are we going to get? And obviously that has implications for the material process. So it's on Brian's team to be creating very high fidelity materials and shaders that very accurately are a mirror for what the car manufacturer themselves are producing in a physical paint. Yeah, so this just talks about, you know, it can bring considerable advantages, but, you know, there's obviously a downside to everything. The logistics of the VR headset, setting people up for VR, and the compute resources. The interoperability, i.e., you know, if something is coming out of a VAD and it's going into a VR Scout session and creatives are making changes, how are we propagating those changes back into a VAD scene file? Are we using a lightweight scene description, the JSON? How are we sort of making sure that those changes are evergreen? One thing we're looking at right now is USD. I know everyone's been looking at USD for like 15 years. But right now we're putting a lot of effort into like, okay, can we actually truly use USD as a container system? And we're making some good progress with that. And then there's obviously this realism gap. Yes, it's amazing, the rendering features, the engine gets better with every release. But hence why there's a lot of pressure on Brian's team. As I mentioned, some of the nuances like car paint and those paint shaders. Brian's going to talk about this one. This is something he developed.
Yeah, I worked with one of our developers. One of the things we have to do, and one of the hardest things to do, is to do roads that are curved. It's really easy to get a car to go down go down a straight road, and the way you would be filming that is straightforward because it's literally straightforward. But one of the things you need to do is sort of have the camera have inertia. So I worked with one of our developers to create a spline system that's a simple look at that just sort of allows us to take inertia and then the amount you would need to brake to go around a curve in order to make it seem like you're actually driving a car correctly down a curve. If you shoot above the wheels spinning, what this tool lets you do is just quickly go through and sort of get the look you need of something. While the actual car is static on the stage, it looks like it's moving, whether you're looking through an interior shot or slightly pulled back in a third-person shot. So this is just one of the tools that we have. It's quick. It's outside of the containing system of Sequencer. You just attach the wall to the spline. You set your spline up correctly, and if the director wants it to go down fast, we can actually have set points on it where we can change the speed or how much it looks at something or how aggressively it's going around those turns. And this has sort of bailed us out of quite a few shows on the fly.
I'll talk about this one real quick. So on a recent project, we were tasked with sort of creating a recreation of a motorsport event. I can't talk too much about the IP behind it. But anyway, we were capturing high-res 360 plates. We're stitching and stabilizing them, but then we were bringing them back in the engine and setting up reflection captures so that we had like a digital car asset, a 3D car asset in the engine. But we were then stuck with the problem of, okay, well, we don't have any animation for the vehicle. So what we did was using GoPro just attached to the original capture vehicle that had the camera array on it. We were using the GPS telemetry from the GoPro. We were bringing that into the engine. We're sort of exporting it to CSV format, bringing that in, and then we were able to get the pathing in sync with the plate capture. So what that gave us was then, okay, now you have like a gross vehicle motion, but then we were also able to tie that into secondary animation for accurate wheel turns. This is really interesting for us, and we're sort of exploring, okay, so what else is interesting in a capture sense and bringing that into the engine and creating more lifelike simulation. So you can see there just some bullet points, like engine metrics, RPM, temperature of the engine, accelerometer data and gyroscope data, really looking at vehicle kinematics on a number of surfaces. Weather data, this is developers in the audience, like procedural weather systems, traffic systems, like that's super necessary for this kind of work. So, it's really a call out and to implore people, hey, if you want to build these kinds of systems, these procedural-based systems for this work, it's going to get a lot of traction. Fuel efficiency data for EVs and stuff like that. And then next slide. And then, how can you use that then to drive other aspects of an immersive experience? Things like dynamic throttle, full 360 immersive sound, real-time sound effects, and then track-based events. So this was a really fun sort of pitch viz thing that we did with our partners at Radiant Images, and it turned into a really nice piece, which hopefully will get released and you guys can see it in the wild. This is a really interesting thing. We're going to wrap this up real quick. I know we're running out of time. Brian's just going to talk about how they took a lighting case study and turned it from one lighting scenario into another, and then how we shot that and how it looked in final.
Yeah, so this is sort of, I'm talking to the idea we talked before about going through our library from the beginning of a commercial process to the end. We had a company come to us. The company was Estee Lauder, and they were looking to shoot a specific area of downtown LA. But the permits for that actual area are about $250,000 a day, if that you can even get the permits. And they actually wanted to be a more glamorous time, so they would have had to have like redone lighting and put up neon and stuff that actually didn't exist in that area. So from an earlier job, we had actually built about 4 to 5 blocks of Wilshire and Grand, completely accurately to GPS data. Just to sort of as an experiment and to do some reflection viz for another company. So what we did is we took that as a starting point and we up-resed it. What we did is we transformed it. We had about 7 days to turn this into a glamorous, luxurious downtown lighting scene. And this was used for multiple things. This was used for both static shots as well as interior shots. So if you go to the next slide, you can sort of see, if you want to talk to how it was filmed.
Yeah, so you can see there, the marriage of sort of the practical set pieces, and the one thing that I guess clients come to us a lot and they say, oh, okay, so the LED is providing all the light, right? And we say, no, yes, it's providing the light, but you still want to come in with your practical lights. And you guys probably know, the nature of the spectrum that LED emits is a very narrow RGB spectrum. So especially in a scene like this with all this kind of rich neon, there was still a need to bring in these practicals, key lights on the actors. But it was, the way that we were able to previs this out and work with the DP, how Brian's team was able to transition a lighting scenario completely from one thing to another. And then how, the marriage then of the practical set pieces. The end result was, what we felt was really beautiful and spectacular. So you can see some of the images there.
Yeah, and as you can see, we physically place certain things within inside of the volume to reflect. So you'll see that there's certain neon signs that will pass that the director liked. Oh, give me more of this sign, but make it blue. Give me more of this sign, but make it purple. Completely allowing them to sort of sculpt this frame and to sort of make it look like that Carly Kloss is really traveling down a road that doesn't exist. So.
I want to leave some time for questions. This was going to be the really cool part, and then I presented it to our patent attorneys, and I sort of induced cardiac arrest in all of our attorneys. So I can't say too much about it. But what I can say is that we're expanding in Los Angeles. We're building new stages that are explicitly going to be dedicated. So Volume 1 is our current LED stage. Volume 2 and 3 there, you can see they're under construction. They're going to be specifically dedicated to automotive and vehicle processing work. We are going to be working on hardware that is going to be able to have vehicles drive onto it, and it's going to interface directly with the engine. And we are building, right now, LED walls, a new infrastructure around LED walls and the way LED walls can move through a volume and be reused on different stages. So it's super exciting. We will be able to talk about it, hopefully very soon. And then this real-time video village is something we're doing with, again, our partners at Radiant Images. So they have an amazing capture vehicle, and you saw it there in one of the earlier videos. It's a street legal vehicle, but it has a 360 capture array actually mounted in a passenger seat. And what they can do is, using 5G streaming now, they can have a video village set up on location, so they can be out capturing. And in combination with that technology and NantStudios and NantWorks fiber infrastructure, we can stream that a proxy stitch straight into the LED volume. So what that means is that we can be on real-time comms with the capture team in real time They can be out there on location. We can be on the LED volume. And we can be seeing the images that are coming in live. When we see them, it's in an Unreal project, it's in an end display, it's in our usual multi-process, set up for in-camera visual effects. But we can be saying to the capture team, hey, we're not really liking this location. This is not working. We have a vehicle in here. We're seeing the kind of reflections we're getting. We want something, another scenario, maybe let's look at a map, let's drive 5 minutes down the road, maybe there's something nicer, we want some specific shapes for silhouettes in the background, mountain ranges, whatever it is. And this is super cool. I don't know anybody else that's really doing this in real time. And then, you've almost induced a safety aspect into the footage that you've captured because you've already seen it on the volume at capture time. So that is super cool.
Cool. Thank you guys for coming.
Yeah, thank you.